The last game between Arjun Erigaisi and Magnus Carlsen ends with a beautiful knight jump that wins the queen. This was the final game of the tournament that took place from May 1st to May 8th in Malmö, Sweden. Arjun pushes the d4 pawn, Carlsen replies with knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5. The Queen's Gambit is a very common opening in this tournament. Erigaisi decides to exchange pawns on d5, removes the tension in the center, and attacks the knight on f6. Carlsen blocks his queen with the bishop on e7 and prepares to castle kingside. Then both players continue developing their pieces. Magnus Carlsen decides where to place his light square bishop. The bishop carefully moves back. White castles and bishop d3 follows. White only needs to develop the knight to f3. Another option was knight e2, with the idea of moving the knight to f4, putting some pressure on the d5 pawn. But this line is a bit harder. Black defends the pawn and Arjun chooses the harder plan, developing the knight through e2, maybe to f4, or maybe to g3 after exchanging the bishop on f6. If this is your first time on my channel, subscribe. Here you will see analysis of top chess games, both new games and older ones. I always follow chess events and make new videos, so subscribe. Carlsen develops the second knight to d7, queen c2, and rook e8. The opening slowly ends, and the players enter the middle game, where a serious fight begins. By the way, write in the comments who do you support, Carlsen or Arjun. Arjun castles and Magnus Carlsen starts an attack on the queen side. He pushes the a5 pawn. There's also an idea to push the pawn further, even if it can be sacrificed, because opening the a-file would make the rook active. With a4, white stops the pawn from moving further. Carlsen offers a bishop exchange on a7, and white accepts. A large exchange happens on e7, rook e1, and knight d f6. Black pieces slowly move to the king side. Only pawns on g5 and f5 are missing for a full attack. But even now Magnus Carlsen creates a strong attack. White could reduce the pressure with knight g3, exchanging one knight, but instead Arjun moves the knight to c1, planning ideas like b3 and c5 to focus on the queen side. Carlsen jumps with the knight to e4, opening the way for the f-pawn, and instead of exchanging, white plays f3, chasing the knight away from the strong e4 square. Arjun takes the knight on c3, Magnus attacks the center with c5, and white answers with the central break e4, exchange on d4 and exchange on d5. Erigaisi invites Carlsen to take the rook on e1 and to get two rooks for the queen. Usually two rooks are slightly better, but everything depends on the position. Here white would have a post pawn, so taking on e1 is very risky. Queen d8, Carlsen retreats. The best move here was to support the post pawn in the center with c4, because the pawn on d4 is very strong. For example, c4, then bishop d7, knight e2. The d4 pawn is attacked, but the post pawn remains. A game with three possible results and a more comfortable position for white. But in the game Arjun makes a mistake. He plays c takes d4 and allows Carlsen to win back the pawn on d5. Magnus doesn't do it immediately, because after taking on d5 there would be a checkmate on 8th rank, since h7 is controlled by the bishop. So first comes knight f6 to control e8. Queen b3, Arjun protects his pawn. Taking it is impossible. If the knight takes, white has a beautiful queen sacrifice. If black takes the queen, mate follows on the 8th rank. The h7 square is still controlled by the bishop, so in the game Magnus Carlsen plays bishop d7, allowing the rook to defend the 8th rank, and also looking at the pawn on a4. Yes, Erigaisi has an extra pawn, but they are doubled pawns. Bishop c4, extra protection for the d5 pawn. Knight e8. The knight goes to d6 through e8 to prepare b5 and push the post pawn on the a file. With every move, black's position becomes better, and later we will see a very interesting knight move. Knight d3. Erigaisi also moves his knight, wanting to bring it to c5 or e5. By the way, Carlsen's f7 square is a little weak, but with knight d6, the knight protects f7, attacks the bishop and prepares b5. Knight e5. Erigaisi strongly places his knight, and it can only be chased away by weakening the diagonal. Queen h4. Finally, white now faces the attack from black pieces. The queen attacks the rook on e1 and the d4 pawn with check. Rook d1 protects the pawn on d4. Bishop e8 because the bishop on d7 was hanging, and bishop f1. It is important to control the open file, and the rook joins the attack. From this moment, Erigaisi decides that he has the advantage and starts attacking on the queen side. With queen b6, he attacks the knight and allows a strike on a4. If the knight is taken now, then black can simply take the rook, but white can also attack the bishop on a1, and Erigaisi does exactly that. With an easy move, Magnus Carlsen plays queen f4, allowing white to take the bishop on a4 and also the knight on d6. Let's look at these lines. And if you still did not like this video, now is a good time to do it. For example, if white takes the bishop on a4, then comes queen e3 check. The king only has h1 and rook c1 with a mate threat on in one move. The problem is that the bishop on f1 cannot be protected. The b5 square is controlled by the knight. The a6 square is controlled by the pawn. Queen d8 doesn't save white, because the king simply goes to h7, so taking the bishop is impossible. If white takes the knight instead, another obvious idea, then queen d4 follows. The king moves and black takes the rook on a1, and the bishop still hangs. And if white tries to defend, then check follows. The king moves back, and again rook c1 appears. So instead of taking those pieces, Erigaisi makes a luft for his king, protecting himself from rook threats on the first rank. But later the rook will still play an important role. The knight, rook, and queen all become important. Bishop e8. Carlsen moves the bishop away, and taking the knight is still impossible because of the fork on d4. Rook a5 is a mistake by Erigaisi, allowing black's queen to check on e3, and after the king moves away, Carlsen misses his win. He gives check king g1, and with knight e5 he lets Erigaisi escape with a draw. A draw was easy after d6. If white pushes d6 with the threat of a fork on d7, black cannot do much here, except give perpetual check. If the king goes there, then queen f4, g3 is bad, so king g1, then the knight joins the attack, so again king g1, and black gets a draw by perpetual check. Instead of knight e5, black could win with queen e3, king h2, rook c1. Taking the knight on d6 changes nothing, because black first gives queen f4 check, the king moves to protect the bishop, then queen d4 check, the king goes to h2, then queen f4 check again, the king moves, queen e3 check, king h2, then black takes the bishop on f1, threatening mate with queen a4. So white must play knight g4 and then queen e1 with mate threat on h1. But in the game we had knight e5, Magnus Carlsen misses the win, but with rook a1, Arjun Erigaisi also misses a draw. Carlsen does not miss such chances twice. In the game, queen e3 follows. The king goes to h2, Carlsen takes the pawn on d4 with the knight. bringing the knight into the attack. And here Erigaisi plays knight g4, which is the final mistake of the game. Pause the video and try to find the best move for black. Small hint, you win the queen. A tactic at club player level. Found it? Then like the video. If not, I'll show you. Knight f3 check. Discover check. Attack on the queen. And after the white king moves, the queen on b6 falls. So Arjun Erigaisi resigned here. Subscribe to the channel.